in a caution clock is a pretty good idea, right? The truck races, when they run green, and they do quite often, can tend to be pretty boring. This adds a level of excitement and interest. And when you begin to break down the math with the caution clock and compare it to how often the caution comes out, the caution clock really just exists to make sure that we don't have any extended green flag runs beyond 20 minutes. And that's good for the trucks and maybe even Xfinity, especially when, again, we're talking about cup-level drivers entering into the mix. It gives those other drivers a chance to tweak on their cars, to get the field bunched back up again, and better odds that we're going to have a better finish. You don't have one car just dominating. Whether or not they bring it up to the to the other series, remains to be seen. And when you begin to sort of break down how often cautions come out during the truck race, I don't think you're going to see it utilized nearly as much as one would think. Now, when it does happen, you do utilize it, I think it's going to go and help that racing and help that viewing. And I'm really excited to see how the whole thing plays out. And if it does work out well and NASCAR decides to go and bring it up to the other series, I'm fine with that. I'm not an old school purist when it comes to NASCAR and the way that they conduct their rules. I want NASCAR to remain and to thrive and to survive so that I can continue watching it and enjoying it, for the rest of my life, right? I want it to be like Star Wars now. We're going to get a Star Wars movie now every single year until the day that I die, and I am great with that. And I want to make sure that NASCAR does everything it can to, keep new people coming and keep it thriving and keep it surviving. I'd hate to see it, become an afterthought in the sports world, and I want to see it grow and I want to see it get bigger. So if this is their means of going and doing it and changing it, then I'm all for it. You have similar things in basketball and football, and I know it's racing, and so the dynamics are different, and there are those people out there that sit back and go, well, I'd much rather see it be like it used to be, where the fastest car running for the, as long as it can wins the race. And I get that, but it's still going to be, for the most part, the best car winning the race. And even now, without a caution clock, you still have a car that may not be the best car not winning the race for various reasons. And so I'm glad that NASCAR is experimenting, looking at new things, and I welcome this, and it'll be great to see how this plays out in the truck races, and we'll be able to find out come next Friday when they race at Daytona. Now, the other big change that was announced this week were the charters, and this is a little bit confusing. I'm not going to spend a ton of time on it because I really want to make sure that I cover the ground for Dale Jr. But NASCAR has decided. Oh wait, I'm sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. There is one more change when it comes to the Xfinity series. The Dash for Cash program is returning to the Xfinity series. There will be Dash for Cash events at Bristol, Richmond, Dover, and Indianapolis. And basically, it's kind of like a mini chase within the series where they're racing for a larger purse. Okay. And I've never really followed it all that much. I mean, I watch all the Xfinity races, but I never really paid all that much attention to the Dash for Cash program. What's cool this year, and again, I think it's an experiment, and I would love to see this come to the Sprint Cup Series, is there's going to be 2 heat races to determine who qualifies for the Dash for Cash in the main race. So at Bristol, Richmond, Dover, and Indianapolis, they're actually going to have heat races before the Xfinity race. And I would love to see NASCAR move to heat race qualifying for everything. That to me would just be awesome. Get rid of the qualifying they have altogether, and let's run some heat races to determine what the starting lineup is. That's what I was kind of hoping the knockout qualifying was going to become, and it didn't become that. I'm fine with the knockout qualifying, and I'm glad that we've gotten qualifying to the point where we can get it in an hour, and it's somewhat interesting. And there's some qualifying changes that I'll talk about here in a moment. But the fact that they're introducing these heat races for the Dash for Cash races inside the Xfinity Series, I think that's awesome. I'm all for that, and hopefully they use this as sort of a testing ground for the other series, and maybe we get something like that up in the Cup Series in the coming years. All right, let's move forward. And I'm going in order of when all these broke. This was early in January when we got these changes, and then some of this other stuff I'm going to talk about actually happened this week. But NASCAR has created a charter system, much like most every other sport, NFL, Formula One, soccer, okay? NASCAR has granted 36 charters, which will have the transferable rights that will provide the NASCAR Sprint Cup team owners the opportunity to build a long-term enterprise. The charter teams will have a guaranteed entry in the field, and this is going to provide, according to the statement, efficiency and certainty, enabling the greater alignment of interests with other key stakeholders. More defined and predictable revenue streams, which they hope will provide more advanced fiscal and operational planning, as well as operational efficiencies. And so basically, my understanding, and I could be wrong on this, and if you want to go and tell me that I'm wrong on this, please, by all means, email me at talkshownerd@gmail.com, because it's pretty clear that, at least so far in some of the pre-race coverage for this weekend, the announcers haven't been touching this at all, because I think that they don't want to confuse everybody. But my understanding is these charters are basically going to enable these teams, these 36 teams, to not have to worry about whether or not their cars end up in a particular race. Now, this is way less to do about the major teams. Hendricks, Joe Gibbs, Roush, Richard Childress Racing. This is way less about them because all of their cars were pretty much fast enough to always make it into every single race based off of all the criteria that necessary to get into a race. What this does do is all those lower rung teams that had to battle in and out and sometimes didn't make a race, in which case they lost revenue because they had sponsors on the car, now they can purchase these charters and therefore go out and get sponsorships and say, hey, we've got a charter. My car will be in the race. There's no doubt. So that way you're not looking at a team whose future is in doubt based off of a poor level of performance. Okay. Now, with that comes the qualifying changes that I'll get into in a moment. But since we're talking about the charters, basically they've shrunk the field down now. So now you're only going to have a 40-car field, 36 charter teams, and 4 open team cars. Now, those open team cars will now compete to qualify to get into the race just like they always did. What you have is basically solidifying what was kind of already taking place and removing some uncertainty for some teams every single weekend. Because this is kind of how it worked out before. You basically had every weekend, 36, 37, 38 teams that consistently made it into every single race. But those bottom 10 or 12, and it was growing just because of the economy, right? Because NASCAR hasn't been as lucrative as it was, say 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago, you had a growing list of secondary teams below the top tier teams that were all battling each other to get into the race. And so what NASCAR has done with these charters is basically said, look, we're going to take some uncertainty out of these lower rung teams. Therefore, you can buy a charter that you can hold on to for as long as you want to, and that'll ensure that your car will be in the race. You can go and buy advertising. We're still going to have 4 open spots for cars that don't have charters, and those cars and teams will compete to get into the race just like they used to based off of qualifying times and things of that nature. So basically, it eliminates uncertainty for 36 charters for these teams so that they can, again, sort of be more confident moving forward. And it helps NASCAR because now you've got teams that have purchased these charters that know they're guaranteed to make it into every single race, which is guaranteed to give them some exposure. And therefore, you don't have teams falling by the wayside because they secured a sponsor, but they didn't make 4 races, and yet they were pretty decent teams. But, because of a number of different circumstances, they ended up having to close shop because they just couldn't run all year long. Now they can run all year long. I think it was a really smart move by NASCAR to do this. They did this independently, and it was a really good solution to a problem that NASCAR was seeing was growing in sort of this economic uncertainty. Now they have a tool to battle against a poor economy and teams struggling to make every single race with these charters. And I think it was a fantastic move on NASCAR's part. Now, with that comes some qualifying procedure changes. Again, no more 43-car fields, and no one's going to miss the 3 cars, because before you ended up having cars that just dropped out, start in parks anyways, and so normally you get into lap 2 or 3 of any given race, and you're already down to a 40-car field, if not a smaller field than that. So again, maximum 40-car field for the Sprint Cup Series, maximum 40-car field for the Xfinity Series, and then a maximum 32-truck field for the Camping World Truck Series. The 36 charter teams will be assigned a starting position, and then the 4 open teams are going to be eligible for the starting position. So the only thing that really changes in terms of qualifying with this is that, again, you have the removal of uncertainty of who is getting into any particular race, except for 4 teams. The biggest change that this creates is it actually takes away quite a bit of the drama that we're used to seeing in the qualifying position choosing dual races the Thursday before the Daytona 500. So you have qualifying coming up tomorrow, Sunday, for the Daytona 500 to determine who is going to sit on the front row first and second. That will be done in 3 rounds, just like we've done in the past. Single car runs in those 3 rounds, and so the fastest cars from each round we'll do knockout style for an hour. The fastest cars in each round will move on to the next round, and then the final, 8? The final 8 cars will compete, or 10 cars will compete to find out who will sit in those 1 and 2 positions. Different. Normally it would set the whole field, but for Daytona it's just the front row. So for the dual races, you have all the other positions. So you'll have positions 3 through 40 chosen in those dual races. It used to be that teams would have to battle their way in to the race in the duels based off of how they finished in the duels. You'll have way fewer teams doing that this time. You only have 4 teams, 4 cars. 2 in each duel will be fighting to see who gets in. Everybody else is just going to be racing to find out where they're going to start for the Daytona 500. So the only negative, again, is that you are going to have some uncertainty now, or you're going to have less drama now in those dual races than you did before. Okay? The last change before we talk about Dale Jr. is NASCAR overtime. We all remember what happened in Talladega with the nonsense at the start-finish line that resulted in Joey Logano stealing that win away from Dale Jr. after those crappy restarts, right, and all the controversy that surrounded it. So what NASCAR has done, and I'm going to try to explain this as quickly as possible. I'll read you what the line is on here, and then I'll kind of explain it. So, for all 3 NASCAR series, a race may be concluded with overtime. That consists of a new green-white checkered finish featuring an overtime line. The location of the overtime line is going to vary from track to track. It'll probably be on the backstretch. That's where it is at Daytona, okay? So after taking the green on an overtime restart, if the leader passes the overtime line on the